Hey everyone, welcome back to the next episode of the Culture Eats Everything, and we mean everything podcast. And so excited to have Kathy Martin on today. She is the CEO of Glenmeadow in Massachusetts, and she's going to talk a little bit about using the right side of the stick in the world of leadership. And so, welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thanks so much for having me, Tom.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump right in. We were talking a little bit about your sport growing up and how it applies to leadership. So, tell us that story.
Sure, I'll be as brief as I can. As a freshman in high school, I knew I wanted to play a sport, and the only options available to me were field hockey or cross country. And not being a runner at that time, I made myself pick up a field hockey stick and figure it out with the good guidance of coaches and fellow teammates. But I knew nothing about the sport, including what side of the stick I was supposed to use. But there was something magical that happened on that field, and it was a way that the world started to make sense to me in a different way when I can put it through the frame of a field hockey game. And it has really been a springboard for me to applying a lot of the lessons that I learned as an athlete and a sports psychologist to leadership in aging services and a senior living community.
I told you before we started here that my daughter also started playing this year for the first time. So it is like learning a whole new language. Even that idea of using the right side of the stick, that you can only use one side of the field hockey stick, for those of us that didn't know that. And so talk about how that translates into leadership and sort of this idea that you have of responding versus reacting.
Sure, there's so much about leadership that is unpredictable, that we don't always control the conditions that we are provided with. We don't have all of the information that we need to make a decision, and too often we get into a habit of doing things the way that we have always done them, in ways that are comfortable for us and that feel automatic. And when we get into stressful situations, that's where we want to go. We want to do the thing that feels easiest. And that creates a moment where we just react. We don't take the time to be thoughtful about what situations, what a particular situation requires, and tailor our leadership to that situation. So I like to look at the dynamics between what would it look like if we didn't just reacted, if we didn't just react, if we took a moment to say, okay, what would it like if we had more control over the situation and could plan a response? That gives us a greater sense of control. It gives us an opportunity to reduce some of the chaos, but it also helps to shift some of those neural pathways from the dominant response or the default success strategy, to use the language from your book, to what is most needed in a particular situation.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the default success strategy because I think that's a new concept for a lot of our listeners. So I'll let you try to explain it from your perspective because you might do a better job than we do.
Well, I don't know that I could do a better job, but from my perspective, your default success strategy is your comfort zone. This is the way that either you have chosen or you have been conditioned to respond in certain situations. And it makes sense to try and put that frame over uncomfortable situations because you want to make it comfortable. So you tend to do the things that you've always done. And I love the quote that you are what you repeatedly do. And that matters in change moments. It matters in leadership. And I think for many leaders who have come up the ranks of, being the person who gets stuff done, to now you move into a leadership role, and how do you shift your thinking from all of the things that you did to get you into that leadership role, which you now need to set aside in some way in order to be a leader. And that's where I think being attentive to what your common sense is an important demonstration of self-awareness, but it's also an opportunity to grow and to leverage some strengths or some skills that you may not have had to use in the same way before.
And what's that been like for you, Kathy? What have you noticed in your leadership journey, maybe your last 6, 12 months?
Yeah, my default is doing things. I am a super doer, and it's been something that has brought me a lot of success professionally. But in order to get the most out of my team and to create the conditions for the most growth for my organization, I can't be the one doing all the things. So I've had to reframe what achievement looks like for me. I've had to reframe what productivity looks like, that it's not necessarily checking things off on a to-do list, as incredibly satisfying as that is. There's more developmental work that I'm doing as a leader now than it is necessarily getting all the things done. It's more about making sure that my team has the conditions through which they can get all the things done. Because it's not about advancing me anymore. It's about how can I help my staff grow within their roles or help them grow into new roles at Glenmeadow that help them feel that same sense of accomplishment and achievement and growth that will keep them energized in their work.
I had to laugh because you said checking off the things on the to-do list is incredibly satisfying. You said it incredibly, like with this great sense of passion, and I can relate. Um,
I'm the person who writes things that I've already finished on a to-do list just so I can cross it off.
all right, you got me there. That I don't do. So, we can all get that intellectually, right? We get, especially for those who have become CEOs, like ourselves, that we know we're supposed to do that, but it's hard to really do that. So, what are you doing to make that transition?
Yeah, I've borrowed a mantra from a board chair I worked with many years ago, who was the CEO of a major corporation. And he said, I ask myself a question regularly. And that question is this something that I and only I can do? That's been a really helpful check-in moment for me when I'm, my impulse is to quickly respond to an email to answer a question that somebody has, but I was copied on an email and not necessarily the person who needs to answer that question. But my impulse is, hey, I know the answer. I'm just going to type it in, and everyone can move on from it. But I recognize that that may not be the role I need to play in that moment, that it's an opportunity for someone else to provide an answer. And it's not about the speed of a response from me necessarily. It's about the quality of the interaction. And one thing that I've learned as I've moved into this role is people should probably hear from me last, not first. Because if they hear from me first, then it tends to stifle conversation and stifle some of that exchange that can be really productive when managing any kind of issue.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. I think that's a good default, although not always the case in my opinion either. There are times where as leaders we have to put out a future, we have to put out a vision for people to buy into, right? Dr. Martin Luther King would not have been terribly effective if he had just sat and listened to the crowd of
Right.
thousands. And
Correct.
so there is
Correct.
a, like everything else, there is a time and a place for it. It's knowing when to use what. That's the real challenge, is to dial it up or to dial it back, to listen more or to talk more.
Right.
And that is the great challenge, I think, of being a leader. What's got you excited about the future for Glen Meadow and your team there?
Well, there's so much, and there's so much happening at Glenmeadow, and we are approaching the work that we do through not necessarily a different lens, but we're focusing it a little bit differently. That we want to redefine aging. We want to redefine what it means to get older and to find ways to celebrate aging as a wonderful time of opportunity. It can be a moment of rebirth and an opportunity to explore new things, and not the old thinking that, when you retire, it's time to, just fade into the background. And that's just not how we embrace the concept of aging. So we are talking more here about a future that includes more intellectual engagement, more opportunities for intergenerational work, more opportunities for exploring new areas in our community, and really trying to differentiate Glenmeadow from what many of our competitors are doing, but still holding true to that mission of serving older adults and meeting residents where they are, that it's not a factor of age. It's anybody can have any kind of need at any point along the age span. So we want to be able to create at Glenmeadow a place where people can see themselves, that they come into our community and they think of the day that they move in as the best day ever and not a capitulation in some ways. We want people to feel excited about moving here and think, wow, I get to move to Glenmeadow, not I have to move to Glenmeadow. So we're really trying to refocus how we think about aging through the lens of Glenmeadow.
I love that. I love this idea of redefining aging, and I never really thought about that, but that this idea of being excited to move into a retirement community like that is, I don't know why, that's just completely new thinking for me. How do you actually do that? How does that come alive? If I were to come visit you guys today, what would I see?
You'd see a lot more vibrancy and energy and activity at Glenmeadow than I think many people would expect. But one of the ways that we're being intentional around that is by inviting the community into Glenmeadow. That there's this feeling that there are things that happen behind the doors of Glenmeadow that I won't get to see until I turn 62 or over, or I need additional assistance. And we want the community to come experience Glenmeadow as a community resource. So invite the community in for speakers. We just completed an $11 million renovation. We have a beautiful community. Come in and see it. And in
Wow.
some ways, it demystifies the process for prospective residents, but also for their families who, like we were talking about before, Tom, this is a whole new language for them too. Like, I don't know what independent living is compared to assisted living. And it's a very uncomfortable, emotional time for families. If we can begin to demystify that a little bit at whatever point our prospective residents are in the process. Maybe they're 6 months from making this decision. Maybe they're 10 years from making this decision. It doesn't mean you can't come over and get a sense of the place and see if this is somewhere that you could see yourself. And what happens often, and I'm sure many other communities experience this, is families come over and their parents are kind of thinking, okay, yeah, maybe this is great, and it's the kids who are saying, okay, when can I move in? Like, can I get on the wait list now for when I retire, because I'm ready to be done with home maintenance and having to figure out what I want for dinner every night and shoveling the snow and all of that. So it's such a process for families that we want to do all that we can to both provide some education around it in a non-threatening way, but also demystify what it means to start looking at a retirement community.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It shows the power of our mindset, right? That ultimately our mindset shapes everything. And so
Right.
as leaders, we have to slow down and see, instead of seeing something as negative, like retirement community, I think many people would think is quote unquote bad. How do we reframe that as an exciting time, an exciting period of your life to grow and to learn and develop and
Right.
maybe take on new skills, maybe serve others in different ways. I've heard this adage that uh, we don't stop moving because we get old. We get old because we stop moving and sort of stop mentally stimulating ourselves. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely true in every definition of the word moving. I think there are good reasons for staying intellectually engaged. There's obviously good reasons to maintain physical wellness, and we've taken a wellness approach to everything that we do here, and finding ways for our residents to keep moving forward in whatever way that they can. And from the perspective of exercise, we have, I consider it a challenge by choice moment. And you go to an exercise class, And do you want to use the chairs that have arms, or are you ready to challenge yourself and use the chairs that don't have arms? And those are individual decisions that our residents can make. And we love it when they look for opportunities to do a little bit more. But there's a saying in exercise science that motion is lotion. And it's true intellectually, it's true physically, and certainly spiritually as well.
We could just end right there, Kathy. Motion is lotion.
Motion is lotion.
That's that's good. I like that a lot. All right, well, let's actually wrap up with one more question, which is for those aspiring CEOs out there or young leaders, what advice would you give them?
That's such a great question, and there's so much good advice out there. But I would go back to something that I was told in about 2009 in a very good-natured way. Don't take yourself too seriously. And I think when we think about leadership, it feels like this big amorphous concept that some people are ready for and are born into. It's the nature versus nurture question. But if you think too much about what you think you can or can't do, you'll most likely find more reasons to not try something than to take the chance and try something. I'm also a firm believer that you lead from where you are, that it doesn't take a title to make anyone a leader. And in any organization, every person who is employed there is a leader. It's how do you lead within the position that you have. So in the context of don't take yourself too seriously, don't think that you're not a leader just because you don't have a particular title, and use the opportunities that are provided to you, or seek out opportunities where you can practice leadership. You can begin to try on what feels good and what doesn't feel good from a leadership perspective, and be open to finding things that work really well, but also be open to finding things that don't work or that don't feel good, and create your own leadership identity or leadership personality um, in a way that feels good for you, and not like you're trying on someone else's superhero cape.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good because I think that's one of my favorite stories from our book, The Great Engagement, is that story of a janitor and how she was such an inspiring leader,
Yes.
but she didn't have the title, right, that we
Right.
think of as a leader. And so could not agree more with that. Well, thank you so much for the time. It's always fun learning and listening and developing and getting new ideas. And I love how you've redefined aging for me because I've got a mother who's doing that right now, and it's not always easy, for sure, and it's a tough period of life for many. So, thank you
Absolutely.
so much for all the amazing work you do and
Thanks,
for
Tom.
all your gifts to the world.
Thank you, Tom. It's good to talk to you.